Hi everybody, welcome to Unit 4. This is the first video of the first tutorial in Unit 4. It is called Cycles in Ecosystems, and we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about how matter moves in a big cycle in ecosystems. Now, we have talked about how energy flows through ecosystems, and it's very important for you to understand a couple of things here. Thing number one, everything in the universe is either energy or matter. Okay, but energy and matter behaves differently. Energy is not cycled in an ecosystem or in any kind of a system, really. Energy goes in, it's used, and it comes out. And here on Earth, every single thing, energy goes in, it's used, and it comes out. And when it comes out, it usually goes away. Sometimes it goes into another system, but it's never cycled back to where it starts. And that's what's important for you to get, is that with cycles, we end up right back where we started to use again, and this is a sustainable type of a system in a cycle. Energy is not sustainable that way, in that it comes from the sun, it moves through the ecosystem, and it goes out. Matter doesn't have that option. We get new sunlight every day. The sun will come up tomorrow. You can bet your bottom dollar, and so we get blasted with new energy every day, and we're getting very efficient. Plants and ecosystems are very efficient at using that energy and letting that energy move through, but it does go in and come back out and leave forever. We don't get new mass every day. Matter, mass, these things are here. They have to be reused. And so that's what we're going to be talking about now, is how that matter is recycled right back to where it started so that it can be used again. Matter goes through cycles all the time. The water cycle happens very rapidly. Some of the other cycles not so fast, but the water cycle happens very rapidly. Water that evaporates out of the ocean today can be raining on the mountains tomorrow, flowing through the rivers next week, and be back in the ocean within 2 weeks. That's how fast the water cycle can go. So let's talk about that. The first thing we got to talk about, though, is where does the water cycle occur? One of the best ways to look at that is by looking at the Earth in terms of spheres. The Earth has four main spheres. Now, the Earth is a sphere itself, but we like to look at it in layers, and it's going to surprise you, some of the things about these layers. First of all life on Earth is connected. You are breathing air that was produced by producers, either plants or algae in the ocean, from God knows where. Who knows? But that air you're breathing may have came from the Pacific Ocean, and we live here in Florida next to the Atlantic Ocean. It may have come from the trees in northern Canada. It may come from Africa. You just don't know. Okay, but uh, the air that you breathe, the interconnection between all the life, it's affected by these spheres. We have the spheres that are based around geology, the shape of the landforms and the water on the Earth. We then have the hydrosphere, which is how the water behaves on the surface of the Earth, whether it's solid, liquid, or gas. Then we've got the atmosphere, which is the air that we're breathing, which is way more than just oxygen. And then finally, we have the biosphere, which is all the life on Earth. And these spheres all interact. There's more spheres, but these are the four main spheres. They all interact, and they all affect life. They all affect ecosystems, and so we need to study them, because they are. I mean, look at this planet. That's it. All that water has been here for about right at 3.5 billion years, maybe 4 billion years, and it's been used over and over and over again. All that oxygen, all that gas that's in the air, it's been there for billions of years. And it gets used again and again and again. Now, one of you really smart kids might be saying, "Yeah, well, we get hit by comets and meteorites and stuff all the time," and that's true. We get, every day we get something like 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools full of water hit the Earth every day in the form of ice that burns up in the atmosphere. But you cannot measure, you cannot imagine how small that is compared to the amount of water already on Earth. And that is, by the way, how the water got on Earth. Was it, the Earth a long time ago was very hot, like a big volcano, and then it started being hit by ice that was floating around in space, and that's where all the water came from. That was a long time ago. It doesn't happen anymore very much, and so as a result, we're stuck with that much water, that much air, that much land, And so all the life on Earth kind of revolves around those three things. All right. We're going to start with the idea of the hydrosphere. There's no real reason, no order that we're going to put these in. We're just to start with the hydrosphere. First of all, understand that uh, this is all of the water. This block right here represents just that little bitty slice right there, and then this block right here represents that little piece. So this block represents a slice of this so small you couldn't even see it. And I wish this were a little bit bigger. You know, I wonder if I can make it bigger. Hang on, I'm gonna try to make it bigger. All right, that's about as big as I can get it. But um, this this block represents the total amount of global water. This is all the water in the world, including the water in the atmosphere. Okay, this is it. All of the ice, all of the salt water, all the fresh water, all of it. Okay. The oceans represent about 96.5% of all of the water on the earth. When you what's left, that 3.5% that's left, 2.5% is fresh water. So that leaves 1% to be water that's in the atmosphere. Yeah, and so that other salt right there, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it represents places like the Great Salt Lake, maybe a couple of other salty reservoirs like the Dead Sea. These are all okay. So let's take it. So that's all the salt water is 97.4%. Let's take a look at the fresh water, which represents about 2.5%. We're going to blow that up into this thing. Of the fresh water that's on the earth, 68.7% of it is glaciers and ice caps, right? 30.1% of it is in the ground. That ends up being 98.8% of water is not fresh water on the surface. Okay, now when I say fresh water on the surface, now I'm talking about Lake Okeechobee, the Kissimmee River. You go up to the Great Lakes. You find any lake or stream on the surface of the earth that's fresh water. It's 1.2% of the fresh water, which is only 2.5% of all the water. We're talking about an incredibly small sliver of that surface water. That includes ice on the ground, permafrost. Now you probably don't know what permafrost is, but it's this frozen layer. So this block right here represents this little bitty thin layer right here. You couldn't even hardly see it if you were looking at this amount up here, all right? But of all the surface water, the fresh water on the earth, okay? All the surface fresh water on the earth, most of it is in ice on the top of the ground, permafrost that's right below the surface. It's like if the ground were to freeze, the mud were to freeze, that's permafrost. 20.9% of it is in the form of lakes. 3.8% of it is bound up in this soil and moisture. We just had some rain last night, so if you go outside right now and you pull a little bit of dirt up out of the ground, that's moisture. About 3.8% of this 1.2% of this 2.5% is soil moisture. The green slice represents swamps, rivers, and marshes. Actually, the green slice represents swamps and marshes, which is about 2.6%. There's an incredibly thin gray layer there that represents 0.49% of the 1.2% of the 2.5%. So we're talking about, if you were to type in 0.49 times, actually 0.0049 times 0.012 times 0.025, you would get an unbelievably small number, and that's the total percentage that the rivers represent of all the water on the earth. It's unbelievably small. Um, and yet that's where we get a lot of our fresh water. And then things like living things, they're in there somewhere. That represents even a smaller amount. But if you think of all the trees, all the animals, all of the plants, they have water tied up inside of them, and that ends up being an amount enough that we can count it. And then about 3% of it is in the atmosphere. That's the clouds and the high and the humidity and stuff that's in the atmosphere. The point I want to make here is that from here up, this this part right here, starting at lakes, from here up, that's what's involved in biological life. Okay. Uh, well, you know what? That's not true. A lot of it lives in the oceans. So forgive me for saying that. But except for what lives in the oceans, on land, this is from here up is what's involved in biological life on land, terrestrial life. And it's just not much. And it's where we get our water. 6.7 billion people on the earth, and we're all fighting over this little slice of this part right here, which is so small about this part. It's crazy. I mean, the rivers represent 0.49% of the surface water, which is 1.2% of all the fresh water, which is 2.5% of all the water on the earth. So it's a really small amount, and that's where we get a lot of our water. If you live in the city of Okeechobee, you get your fresh water from Lake Okeechobee. It is pulled in from a an inlet that is out by the pier. If you've ever been down there, it is treated and cleaned rather immensely. They use a lot of stuff. They use filters, ultraviolet light, chemicals, all kinds of things to clean that water, and then it's sent to your house. You get it out of the lake. Um, Now I get my water out of this groundwater here, this 30.1%. I stick a well in the ground and I get my groundwater out of there. And we do cheat by pumping water out of the ground and kind of artificially putting it in here sometimes with farms and kind of rural homes. But for the most part, this is where we get our water from. And this is why we're starting to see a huge effect on the earth with people that are fighting over this stuff because there's just not much of it left. Fresh water is becoming the most valuable commodity on the earth, far more valuable than oil, far more valuable than things like gold or silver. Fresh water is hard to come by, and a lot of people, something like half the people on the earth, don't have access to clean fresh water. Something like 2% of all deaths on the earth every day are caused by not having access to clean water, sickness and stuff that's involved with that. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to think about. It's incredible how very thin the the water is that we have access to use. And most of this water right here, by the way, is used for agriculture. It's not used for, if it's used, most of it's used for agriculture or other manufacturing processes uh, instead of human consumption. And by the way, this is where a huge amount of pollution is occurring. We are polluting these things left and right, and there are now in the world entire regions where the water has been so polluted that it can't be used. California has the Salton Sea. Was it Michigan? What city was that in Michigan? It wasn't Detroit, was it? It was some other place where some company spilt some chemicals in the water supply, and now they can't use their water. They built a whole city. If you look at a map, you'll see that lots of cities are built around water supplies. If you build a whole city around a water supply and all of a sudden that water supply goes bad, well, what do you do? So things to think about with the hydrosphere. Things to think about how they affect our life on Earth. Another one is called the atmosphere. Now, this is not to scale, okay? If this were to scale, the skin around the Earth would be the atmosphere would be so thin you could barely see it. So the atmosphere does not extend this far out, but there are 5 layers to the atmosphere. We live in the troposphere, and that goes up to about 12 kilometers, which is what, about 7.5 miles? I want to know. I'm going to find out. So hold on, let me do the conversion. Dude, I swear I guessed at that. So 12 kilometers is 7.4565 miles. We'll just round up to 7.5 miles. I have no idea how I did that. So when we look at this here, we're looking at about 7.5 miles from the surface of the earth up. It does not tend to change all that much with the mountains and stuff. We're talking about 7.5 miles from the surface of the ocean. If you're in a high mountain range, you're just closer to that stratosphere. Now that layer changes all the time, but the length of that layer changes all the time depending on things like how hot the surface of the earth is and where you are. So it's not even at 7.5 miles all the way around, but it does. Now you get past that, you get into something called the stratosphere. And these things are defined by a couple of things. Most of them have to be, of course, are distance away from the surface of the earth, which means temperature. Very quickly, I know that you think warm air rises and cold air falls, and it does, but the reason you have warm air is because sunlight hits the earth, warms up the surface of the earth, and so the warmest layer is the one closest to the surface of the earth. Now this is what causes a huge amount of our weather patterns, is that warm air then rises and this air up here, which is very cold, falls, and it creates kind of a circle or a cycle. That's how we get winds and storms and stuff. But these are defined by a few things, but one of the main ones is how far away they are from the surface of the earth, which has to do with their temperature. Now, another thing is humidity. The water tends to stay down here because that's just where it is, so it doesn't go much past the troposphere. It does sometimes get into the stratosphere, but very rarely. We do see stratospheric and even mesospheric clouds, but not much. Up here in the stratosphere, which is 7.5 miles out to, y'all want to guess? All right, let's see, 50 is 31 miles, right? So like 7.5 miles to 30 miles is the stratosphere. 30 miles to what, like, I don't know, like 60 miles is the mesosphere. 60 out to, I wonder how far out 700 kilometers is. 700. So 60 miles out to 434 is the thermosphere, and then 434 way on out to 10,000 kilometers. This is where the space shuttle's at. This is where a lot of our satellites are at. The satellites that Elon Musk is launching right now are closer than this. They can't be in the thermosphere, but they're not too far past it. Now, each one of these has a different importance, and we rarely go past. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on in the stratosphere. Humans, this is where all the flights occur, the big, huge flights. If you've ever been on an airplane and you've gone a long way, not like a little guy, like not like your uncle's airplane. We're talking about like on a jetliner, like if you fly Delta Airlines or something, that goes up here in the stratosphere. And if you see jets in the sky, that's where it is. So if that kind of gives you a help as to where things are. But this is what the layers of the atmosphere are. Now, I want you to understand something. The atmosphere is made up of a bunch of gases. It's not just oxygen. In fact, oxygen is not even the main component. What you're breathing right now is very much not oxygen. Okay, most of what you're breathing right now is nitrogen, as you can see. These are just the gases, by the way, because this doesn't even include the water in the atmosphere. So you got to change this pie chart a little bit to include the amount of water in the atmosphere. But these are just the gases. Most of it is what, like 78% of it is nitrogen. Most of what you're breathing right now is not oxygen. And in fact, the oxygen is the next largest group there. It's about 21% of the other stuff. About 20%, 21% is oxygen right there. And that does change, by the way, but not much. So we live in about a 20, 21, 22% oxygen atmosphere. Too much of that oxygen will kill you, by the way. Then you got other things like argon. Argon represents a lot of it. But then after that are these other trace gases that are, but you're breathing things like helium and hydrogen and, who knows, methane. There's all kinds of stuff floating around in there. But the most of it is the oxygen. So if you look at this, we're going to go back one. If you look at the atmosphere, and by the way, that composition that you just looked at is right here in the troposphere. It may change as you go up. But if you look at it, most of this is not oxygen at all. Most of this is something else, nitrogen, and other trace gases. So something to think about. Oh yeah, here we go. This shows you the water vapor. No, it doesn't. But this shows you another look at it. Where is the carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide, you can't even hardly tell. Is such a small amount, but that is having a huge effect. The amount of carbon dioxide in the air is so low. You know what? I see what this is. This is the trace gases that are left. But the amount of carbon dioxide that's left in the atmosphere, this little sliver, this little red sliver, okay, this is what we're looking at now. And a lot of that's carbon dioxide, but it's hardly anything. There's very little carbon dioxide in the air. Then you got neon, helium, methane, krypton, and hydrogen. Now that carbon though is important because that amount of carbon that's in the air is huge, and it has a huge effect. Even though it represents an incredibly small amount, it has a huge effect. So by changing the carbon just a little bit, by adding just a little bit more carbon in the air, we're really having a huge effect on the atmosphere. And then don't forget the water vapors we already talked about. Now oxygen occupies 21% of the air, and we require it. So we're going to talk a little bit about oxygen in living things, and these people are doing aerobic exercise. AEROBIC means aerobic, means it needs lots of oxygen. And what we learned a long time ago in terms of physical health is that if you are going to exercise, if you're going to do anything physical and try to improve your body's health, it needs to be an oxygen based workout. And so what I want to talk to you about right now is using oxygen in your daily life. If you are an athlete, you need to very much focus on the amount of oxygen you're getting into your body. Now, I've told this story a bunch, and I kind of get in trouble sometimes with the coaches, but there is a maximum point that your body can reach, and after that, you're starting to do damage. You pull in oxygen through your nose into your respiratory system, it gets spread out through your body into the circulatory system, and the more energy you use, the more oxygen you need, which is why you start breathing hard. Your body has a very amazing ability to do this, is to work out and breathe hard, and move oxygen. The harder you breathe, the more oxygen you're pulling in. You understand this, but here's the thing: you can push yourself too far. And if you stop getting enough oxygen, if you push yourself further than the amount of oxygen you're consuming that you can pull in, then your body is going to start using sugars and doing what we call anaerobic respiration. And that's going to happen in the high energy requirement areas, like right here underneath your left ribs, because that's the liver, and the liver uses tons of oxygen. With the exception of the brain, it uses more oxygen than anywhere else except the brain. Now, your body's not going to let your brain starve of oxygen. It would literally cut off the flow of blood to extremities before it lets your brain run out of oxygen. But the next highest place is underneath your rib there, the liver, and that'll run out. And so, as you are running or working out or playing or something, if you've ever noticed you had a little bit of pain in your side, that's because your body has run out of oxygen and is starting to burn sugar without oxygen, and it creates something called lactic acid, which creates that pain in your side. So if you've pushed yourself that far, you've pushed yourself a little too far. Now, I know that coaches tend to push you that far. And, it's okay to do that every once in a while, but if you do that routinely, you're pushing yourself too far. You need to teach yourself how far can you go. So if you're doing your own workout, if you have your own running program, then that's when you stop, is just before you get to that point. But you can back off on how much you're exerting yourself, and kind of stay just under that, and you're at your maximum ability. And by the way, your body will get better, and that threshold will increase more and more the more you do it. Now, I am a fat old man that couldn't run from here to there without breathing hard, so I'm kind of being hypocritical here, but I used to be pretty active, and I've been there, and I remembered thinking to myself, man, if I just slow down a little bit, I could do this all day. So teach yourself to get to that point in that exercise routine, and stay just under that point where you're out of oxygen, because that's the limiting factor there. Now, it's interesting that we use oxygen, because it's kind of a weird thing in the history of the earth that there's even oxygen here. It all came from photosynthetic organisms, but it's our biochemistry is based around it very heavily. But it's interesting, there are some organisms that don't require oxygen. Now, we are what's called obligate aerobes. We have to have oxygen. There are some organisms that are called obligate anaerobes. They don't need oxygen. In fact, oxygen can kill them. And there are some that are what they call facilitative anaerobes, or facilitative aerobes, meaning they can do either way. They would rather have oxygen, but they can live without oxygen. These are interesting little bacteria, but all of the anaerobic organisms are small, because it just doesn't do a very good job when you're trying to make ATP using sugar. So if you're going to live without oxygen, you're going to be a little small bacteria, single cell organism. And so these are called obligate anaerobes, and they do not, in fact, oxygen will kill them. So as you think about this, think about the couple of kinds of organisms that do and do not have oxygen. All right, don't do and do not use oxygen. Now, this activity is just for you to read. It does not require you to have any specialized equipment, so just read through it and do it. I get a lot of you guys get to this point and you go, I don't have any test tubes full of funny yellow stuff. Well, you don't need it. Just read it, okay? So that was just the hydrosphere and the atmosphere. Now we're going to talk about the geosphere. The geosphere is all of the land, whether it's above water or below water, but it's all of the land. It is not, to be very clear, it is not anything living. Okay, if there was not one single living thing on Earth, not one human, plant, whale, Justin Bieber, or bacteria, you see how I put those in order, right? Um, the there would still be rocks. There would still be large and small rocks above or below the surface of there. There'd still be things like sand. This is the geosphere. Okay. Now I want to be clear. Dirt is not part of the geosphere because dirt or soil, I should say soil. Soil is not part of the ecosphere or the geosphere. Soil is made out of dead and decaying plant and animal matter, therefore, it is part of the biosphere, which is next, not part of the geosphere. Think about the Earth. If there was nothing alive on it, it would look a lot like this. We're exploring Mars right now with that new rover they put up there, and we're seeing something that looks very much like this. Mars is very much a planet without anything alive on it. If there is, it's very small bacteria. There's no soil. There's sand, there's rocks, but there's no soil because soil is part of the biosphere. But the geosphere is everything that is not, you know, you know, well, yeah, more rocks and stuff, right? Now, these animals are not part of the geosphere, but they live in that harsh environment. And I really don't know why they explain it, except goats live in a dadgum rough dadgum place. And there is a little bit of life growing here, and these things live off of it. These things are hardy. These things are tough dadgum animals, right? But you can read this if you want. Um, Many organisms have learned to adapt in these really harsh environments. We call them extremophiles because they like extreme. What is extreme to us? Places that are full of acid that's just pouring out of the ground, or really thermally hot, steamy vents that would scald us and kill us instantly, or places that have so much acid or no oxygen or something like that. We call them extremophiles, and they live in these extreme places. Now they're including this as part of the geosphere because the geosphere is what spits out that acid or that volcano hot environment or that hot water or whatever or that no oxygen environment. Um, that's why they're including that. The geosphere includes all of these places, and yet we find things living in the craziest of places. And there's bacteria that live in volcanoes in South America. Freaking volcanoes. Big, hot, dadgum volcanoes, and they're living there. And by the way, volcanoes are also highly acidic. Harsh place. You wouldn't last more than 30 seconds. But this is where these things live. These things have adapted to living there, and that's actually not quite the whole story. But then there's the biosphere. The biosphere is a ton of fun because the biosphere is all the living things. And I did not take this picture, but this could very well be in my backyard. That's a rough looking cow right there, some kind of a scrub cow, but it is representing a part of the ecosystem. It's in a field full of plants that's a part of an ecosystem. Okay, there's animals that live that you can't see. Right now I see only two animals. There may be some cows back there, but I only see two animals. Okay, or one type of animal, and that's the cow. But there are miniature microscopic animals and plants and fungus that you can't see in this picture that are part of the biosphere. I'm certain that somewhere in that sky there are some birds that are flying around that are part of the biosphere. And so the biosphere is literally every single thing that's living on the surface of the earth. The biosphere interacts heavily with the three other main spheres, the hydrosphere, the geosphere, and the atmosphere. It is crucial that those things are behaving the way they're supposed to because that's crucial to all life on earth. All life on earth requires the geosphere, the hydrosphere, and the atmosphere. Okay? Yes, even things underwater require the atmosphere, by the way. Um, and here's the other thing. Somebody told me one time, they said, if the biosphere is the layer around the earth in which all living things live, um, it would be thinner than the skin of a strawberry. If you were to break the earth down to the size of a strawberry, it would be thinner than the skin on the strawberry. It's so incredibly thin. We're talking about the deepest part of the ocean where we find life up into the highest part of the sky where we find life. That layer is still so thin compared to the earth that it's like thinner than the skin on a strawberry, which is like, super thin, you know. So incredibly thin layer in which all life on Earth is found. And as far as we know, in the entire universe, that's all the life in the entire universe. We've never found it anywhere else, for sure. We think we might have, but we're not sure. As far as we know, living things. And by the way, all this living stuff, everything you see, is based around cells. So that was the biosphere. Now we're going to talk about some cycles here. This would be a good time to pause and take a break if you need to. I've been going for 30 minutes and still got a little bit more to go. We're going to be talking about some cycles here, the water, nitrogen, and carbon cycles. Remember, we talked about how matter cycles. We don't get new matter all the time. We get new energy every day, but we don't get new matter. So we've got to reuse it. And the first thing I want to tell you, I love it when I teach this because that fresh, clean glass of water this lady's about to drink, that ain't the first time it's been drank. We reuse our water over and over and over again, especially in the biological systems. Water is heavily moves through the biosphere all the time, and it's used by plants and animals just alike. And so there is simply no doubt that the water that is in that glass has been drank before by some living thing, possibly a human, and used in the biological systems and go out in the biological processes, the urine, the feces, the sweat. But the water cycle is so amazing because it can take that waste water and it can return it to almost pure water. So we cycle the water just like this. This is the natural cycle for water. Um, Water sitting on the surface. Okay, it doesn't have to be a pool of water, by the way. Water is evaporating right now out of the ground and out of the plants, but it also comes out of the surface water. So as it gets warmed up, it evaporates. Happens all the time. It moves up into the upper atmosphere and forms clouds, and then that clouds, depending on the day, depending on how humid it is, depending on lots of things, but those clouds condense and they start to the smaller drops get bigger and bigger. And the next thing you know, boom, it comes down as rain. But one thing I'd like for you to point out, the amazing thing happens right here at this evaporation. As soon as that water evaporates and it frees itself from this pool of water, it's clean again. Okay? That could have came out of a big old pile of elephant poop. But when it evaporates up into the air, it's clean. Got nothing but water. And it comes over here and it rains and it goes into the ground and you turn on the tap and drink it. And it may have been elephant poop just weeks earlier, but it is clean water, clean drinking water for you. And that is what is so amazing about the water cycle, is that water itself, because of its shape, can do this, and it's a pretty incredible thing. Um, and the water cycle um, is driven by the sun. So every time the sun hits the earth, it's moving the water cycle. The amount of energy that's tied up in the water cycle is pretty incredible, and it causes the sunlight causes the movement of all this. And to be honest with you, it causes the movement of the other two cycles as well. But the water cycle is powered by the sun, and we use the water cycle, the power in that water cycle. We can use it for all kinds of things. If you've ever seen a hydro, what are they called? Hydroelectric dams. Like the one out in uh, near Las Vegas, the Hoover Dam. That takes the power of the water cycle. That water is evaporated from the ocean, goes way up into the air, it comes down and lands on a mountain, and as it moves through that mountain, we catch it and move it through a turbine to create electricity. That energy came straight from the sun. Okay, the power to get that water up and over there and then back in those mountains before it goes back to the ocean was was caused by the sun, and then we can use that to, of course, power things like I think all of Las Vegas is powered by the Hoover Dam. So it's pretty crazy how much energy is tied up in the water cycle, but that's what it takes to keep that clean water. Um, the ne- the Yeah, so we're already talking about this. This kind of tells you what I just said about how the water moves around, but yeah, it's kind of disgusting. But the truth is that that glass of water has been drank before, and every time I talk about this, I get thirsty. Yep, that was water. That water has definitely been drank before. Okay, the nitrogen cycle is a very complex cycle. It is hard to teach, so I'm just going to tell you some highlights about it. I would like to point out that in today's videos or in today's calendar, I have linked lots of stuff here. And these links, like here's the water, the nitrogen, and the carbon cycle, these are really good videos to explain this. So if you don't get this, um, then go watch that video because that guy does a good job. But listen, nitrogen is funny because nitrogen is in the air. If you remember when we looked at the atmosphere, man, there was like most of it is nitrogen. The problem is that is just nitrogen, the single atom of nitrogen floating around all by itself. It is number 7 on the periodic table, and it doesn't react that much So a lot of times you just find nitrogen all by itself. The problem with it is that we can't use nitrogen all by itself, nitrogen just floating around. We can only use, and living things on Earth can only use nitrogen in the form of two nitrogen atoms stuck together to create something called N2. But that's not how it is in the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, it's just N, so it is basically useless to us. So the nitrogen cycle is very much about getting the atmospheric nitrogen to be something that can be used by living things. And so there's this whole process called nitrogen fixation. And when you go through here, you can click on these little blue dots and they tell you what to do. But the nitrogen cycle is this way, right? Um, what we call denitrification is when things like bacteria and stuff take nitrogen that's in the ground, whether it's in the soils or wherever, and they get that nitrogen out and return it to the atmosphere. We'll start there. Denitrifying bacteria break down nitrates to form nitrogen gas, which puts nitrogen back in the atmosphere. Now, the atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, and I know it says N2, and I guess nitrogen is in the form of N2 in the atmosphere, and we need it as an N bonded somewhere else. So I had that backwards. My bad. I'm not that smart. Don't make fun of me. Anyway, things happen in the atmosphere, such as lightning, but there's other things too. There's bacteria in the ground that can grab the N2 and do things with it. But nitrogen fixation, which is the opposite of denitrification, is when things like bacteria or lightning strikes that nitrogen and turns it back into a more useful form. That's what it is. I had it backwards. The N2 stuck together, we can't use that. But something has to break it apart and stick it somewhere else. So that N all by itself is, see, there's two N's right there, and it has to be broken apart and have some hydrogen attached to it to create ammonia so that it can be used by living things. And that ammonia then goes into the plants, which then goes into the animals, which then goes into humans. It's in the soil and everything. The plants need something called nitrous oxide, which is what another type of bacteria does. They will take this stuff and turn it into this stuff, right? I mean, there's just so many things going on if you want to read about it. And ammonification is a huge part of it. There's tons of ammonia. I know when I say ammonia, you think it's a bottle of ammonia, but it's found all over the place. It's a crucial part of the decomposition process, right? But as you can see, this is a pretty complex cycle here. That's because into the nitrogen in the atmosphere, we've got to get it turned into these products NH4, NH3, NO2, NO3. And so it takes a large amount of things in the environment that put that nitrogen out of the air and then in the forms that can be used by biological things. And then instead of leaving it like that, it's got to be put back into the air so that it can be used again, which is why it's a cycle. And so these decomposers, there are two types of things. There are bacteria that take nitrogen out of the air and put it in the ground so we can use it, and there's other bacteria that take the nitrogen that's in the ground and put it back in the air to create this cycle. Okay, but in between all that are the living things on Earth that all of them need nitrogen. You can't make proteins without nitrogen. You can't make DNA without nitrogen. It's crucial to all life on Earth. Okay. And the life cycle we're going to talk about today is the carbon cycle. It is not; these are not the only three cycles. We skip the phosphorus cycle, we skip the sodium cycle, but those are smaller, minor cycles. But the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the water cycle are huge for all living things on Earth. Now, as important as water is, as important as nitrogen is, carbon is the backbone of all living things. Every molecule used to make your body starts out with carbon. If you remember, we have the four major biomolecules. That's lipids, carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. All four of those are basically carbon structures with something stuck to it. So carbon is a hugely important part of all living things. And so it has to be cycled. You have carbon in you right now, but when you die, that carbon can't just stay in your body. It has to be pulled out and put back into the atmosphere so that we can use it again. And that's happening all the time right now. The soil is full of carbon based dead plants, and that carbon has to be broken down and removed so that it can be used again. Um, I mean, everything when it dies is full of carbon, and that carbon has to be returned back to the cycle, whether it's in the atmosphere or in the ground, so that it can be used again. Just like water and just like nitrogen, carbon exists in all of the spheres of the earth. You find it in the atmosphere, you find it in the biosphere, you find it in the geosphere, and of course the biosphere. I think I said biosphere, not hydrosphere. So you find it in the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, and the geosphere, all over the place. But it's, the biosphere is basically made out of carbon mostly, and so there has to be this whole process of it going in and out. Now, photosynthesis and respiration are a huge part of the carbon cycle. Okay, photosynthesis pulls carbon out of the atmosphere, respiration puts it back. Okay, but plants also, when they die, when living things die, um, plants and animals and anything really, they get to be decomposed, and sometimes they get tied up in the form of fossil fuels, which stay in the ground for billions of years. It's still carbon, and technically it's still part of the carbon cycle, even though it's been stuck in the ground for billions of years. But when an animal decays, it can also, just through the respiration of the decomposers, it goes back into the atmosphere. So a lot of it is photosynthesis and respiration. That's really the main parts of the cycle. But an interesting thing happens when we take the fossil fuels out of the ground. That's coal, oil, natural gas, that kind of stuff, and we burn it. We're completing part of the carbon cycle that happened years ago. Billions of years ago, photosynthesis pulled the carbon out of the atmosphere and put it into plants and animals, mostly plants, which ended up being fossil fuels way underground. And then they stayed there. And they've been there for billions of years. But now we're starting to very rapidly pull them out, burn them, and that puts the carbon back in the atmosphere. So guess what's happened to the atmospheric carbon? It's going up rapidly. And as a result of the atmospheric carbon going up rapidly, we're seeing things like, supposedly, like climate change. So um, when the carbon gets in the atmosphere, it acts like an invisible blanket. It lets the sunlight in, but it doesn't let the heat back out. And so the thicker the blanket, every day we warm up just a little bit more, a very small fraction of a degree. But if you do that over, 365 days a year for 100 years, you can see some changes. And it doesn't take much change in the temperature of the earth to cause huge changes in our cycles, like uh, like the weather cycle and things like that. There's so much of an effect that can be caused by just a small extra amount of carbon that we're taking out of the ground to use for our factories and power stations and vehicles and stuff like that. And it can have a huge effect on the atmosphere. Now, I I get it. I'm all about, we should be stopping this. The problem is that from things like coal, oil, and natural gas, we get so many products that make our lives the way it is today, that if we were to stop using oil today, almost 95% of the people on the earth would die soon. It is literally what keeps most of the population of the earth alive, that coal and that oil and that natural gas. So we need to stop using it, but we can't stop using it because if we do, everybody dies. So what do? The trick is we've got to start investigating other ways to provide us with the products that coal, oil, and natural gas give us. And oil, for example, gives us amazing things. Of course, when I say oil, most people think you put gas in the car, and that is a huge part of it. But oil also provides us with plastic. And if you want to figure out how much plastic we need, just look around you. There is plastic everywhere. We make your clothes out of plastic. Your phone is made out of plastic. Half your house is made out of plastic. Your furniture is made. Half of your car is made out of plastic. Um, Oil also provides us with the building blocks to build a lot of chemicals that we use in our life, especially things like medicines and other chemicals. And then, of course, there's the energy to run the electricity in our homes. Natural gas is used to make fertilizers, and we can produce 100 to 200 times more food per acre than we used to, just because we're using oil-based fertilizers, natural gas-based fertilizers. It's just really incredible how much oil, coal, and natural gas gives us. But of course, there's a cost, and that cost is that we're having a warming climate it's getting scary. So I want you to think about that. When it comes time to think about the idea of people talking about alternatives to fossil fuels, we need to do it. We need to do it. You just got to trust me on this. Um, but until they figure it out, we're going to still be using our, gasoline powered cars and airplanes and trains and boats and things like that. We're still going to be getting our electricity from coal fired power plants, and that's just the way it is. But the more we can convert those things to solar panels, for example, or electric cars, the less of this carbon we're pulling out of the ground that's been there for billions of years and putting back in the atmosphere. There is a cost to using coal, oil, and natural gas. Now, some people say that, you know, um, we've already reached the end of it, that we've gone too far. I don't personally believe that. I don't personally believe that we have gone too far. I think that we still have plenty of years left to try to figure it out, but we do need to be working on these alternative fuels. Hey, that's it. I know this took a while, but you did it. So this is all for cycles and ecosystems, and please make sure that you're looking at these videos that go with it. They have a lot. They'll help you out a lot. And I'm gonna see you on the next video. Get to work.